There are moments in life that feel like a cold punch to the gut, the kind of memory that shows up on a cold night without warning and freezes you in place. For me, it's always Christmas Eve. Not because of the lights or the carols, but because of a specific house on a specific street, and the woman who once lived there, Evelyn Price. She had it all: a brilliant career, a perfect family, a beautiful home. Then, one day, she didn't. Her ex-husband and his family fought her for her daughter, and won. They used her work against her, painting her as a bad mother, and she just left. Every Christmas, I'd see her walking by that house, a ghost of her former self. But this last Christmas, I saw her stop. She stared at a trash can outside her old home, and something in her eyes told me she was looking for a secret, a truth that had been buried there. What she found, and the truth that came with it, would change everything. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. I still remember the day I met Evelyn Price. Though I didn't know her name then, she was a vision of determined, focused ambition in a sharp-cut black suit, the kind of woman who didn't walk into a courtroom, she owned it. I lived across the street from her perfectly manicured house, and from my window, I watched her world unfold. She had everything: a high-powered job, a husband who seemed to admire her, and a beautiful little girl with a cascade of blonde curls who would run to her mother's arms every day after school. Their lives were a carefully arranged display of success, a curated image of the American dream. But images, I've learned, can be the most fragile of things. One day, the image cracked. Her husband, Mark, a man who always seemed more like an accessory than a partner, began to look at her with a new coldness. Their arguments, once confined to the hushed tones of a well-maintained home, started to spill out, audible whispers of betrayal and resentment. It all came to a head on a cold Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. The lawyers, the police, and a social worker's car all descended on their street, a silent, official procession that signaled the end of a family. They said she worked too much, that her ambition had consumed her, that she was an absent mother. Her daughter, a child who had worshipped the ground Evelyn walked on, was gone. Her husband had full custody, aided by his powerful family who had a vast network of connections that her legal brilliance couldn't overcome. I saw her walk out of that house, her face a blank canvas of shock and loss, her eyes hollowed out like two burnt-out stars. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I just watched, a helpless spectator to the quiet implosion of a life. The house that had once gleamed with a family's warmth now felt like a tomb. For 3 years, that house remained as a monument to her loss, and every Christmas, I would see her, a ghost haunting her past, walking slowly past the place where she'd lost everything. She never approached the door. She just stood there, a solitary figure in the biting cold, a silent testament to a grief so profound it seemed to have become a part of her. The lights and decorations on that house, now lit up by her ex-husband and his new younger wife, seemed to mock her, a cruel and garish reminder of a happiness she could never have again. This past Christmas Eve, though, something was different. The air was thick with the kind of snow that promised to blanket the world in a silent stillness. I was on my way home from a night shift, the streets empty, the quiet broken only by the crunch of my boots on the fresh powder. As I drove down her street, a familiar shape caught my eye. It was Evelyn, but she wasn't just walking. She was standing still, staring at a dumpster behind her old apartment building. I pulled over, my curiosity overcoming my usual reluctance to get involved. She was bundled in a thick coat, her breath a series of small, visible clouds in the frigid air. Her hands, I noticed, were shaking, and not just from the cold. She was digging through the trash, her movement slow and deliberate. I thought maybe she was looking for a lost keepsake, a piece of her past that she couldn't let go of. But what I was about to discover, and the truth that came with it, would shock me to my core. It was a secret a dark hidden truth that had been buried for years. And now, in the stillness of that Christmas night, it was about to be unearthed. The next day, I couldn't shake the image of her from my mind, the sight of her. A woman who had fought for corporations and won millions, reduced to searching through garbage, felt profoundly wrong. I had to know. I found her address in my old neighborhood directory and, on a flimsy pretense of dropping off some homemade cookies, I knocked on her door. The woman who answered was a shadow of the Evelyn I had once known. Her face was tired. Her eyes still held that haunted, empty look. I told her I saw her the night before and was worried. And for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes, a flash of defensiveness. But then, it faded. She invited me in and over a cup of hot tea. She told me the most heartbreaking story I'd ever heard. It was not a story of finding something, but of a long-held, devastating secret. She told me that her ex-husband, Mark, had a child, not with his new wife, but with another woman, a woman from a past relationship he had deliberately hidden from his family to protect his image. It was a little girl, 3 years old, named Lily. When Lily's mother had died suddenly in a car accident a year and a half ago, Mark had quietly made sure the child was put into the foster care system. He had enough money and influence to make sure she was taken care of, but not enough love or courage to claim her. The child was an inconvenient truth, a threat to his carefully constructed public life. He had visited her, but from a distance, never claiming her, never bringing her home. And the night I saw Evelyn, she had been searching for something of Lily's in the trash, an item she had discarded after visiting her in the foster home. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The man who had accused Evelyn of being a bad mother had abandoned his own child, leaving her to fend for herself in a cruel, indifferent system. And that's when Evelyn's eyes, once so full of a profound emptiness, began to fill with a cold, clear light of purpose. She told me she had a plan, a quiet, methodical form of revenge that would be far more devastating than any public confrontation. She wasn't going to ruin his reputation or expose his lies. No, she was going to do something much more subtle, much more personal. She was going to give him something he could never have a life lesson in the most brutal and intimate way possible. She began the process of adopting Lily, not as a mother. She confessed to me then, but as a weapon. Her plan was to document everything, every moment of joy, every laugh, every milestone. She wanted to create a perfect family, a beautiful life. And one day, when Lily was old enough to understand, she would show her the truth, show her that her own father had abandoned her. She would then present the photo album to Mark, a silent, beautiful slap in the face. She would show him what a good mother truly was, and what he, with all his money and power, could never be. It was a plan so cold, so brilliant in its calculated cruelty, that I was stunned. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her own identity, taking back the narrative that had been so cruelly stolen from her. The next few months were a blur of paperwork, of endless meetings with social workers and lawyers. Evelyn threw herself into the process with the same fierce determination she once used in the courtroom. She passed every psychological evaluation, every background check. She took parenting classes, read books on childhood trauma, and transformed her sterile, empty house into a warm, inviting home. I watched her from my window, a silent, fascinated witness. She was no longer a ghost. She was a woman on a mission. And in a few short months, that mission was complete. Lily, a timid, quiet little girl with large, frightened eyes, moved in. The first few weeks were a challenge. Lily hoarded food, afraid it would be taken away. She woke up screaming from nightmares, reliving the morning she found her mother unresponsive. Evelyn, a woman who had once navigated the ruthless world of corporate law, now found herself learning how to braid hair, how to help with homework, and how to hold a frightened child until the terror passed. She was a natural, a revelation. She never raised her voice. She never showed frustration. She simply stayed present, her love a silent promise. And in doing so, she was not only healing Lily, she was healing herself, the cold, calculated revenge she had planned was slowly being replaced by something else, something she hadn't anticipated. She was starting to love this child. On the third anniversary of her own personal tragedy, Evelyn took me to a cafe for coffee. A rare, personal gesture for a woman who had spent the last 3 years in isolation. She had a different look in her eyes now, not of emptiness, but of warmth. She talked about Lily with a soft glow, telling me about her first A+ in math, about the first time she had laughed, a real, uninhibited laugh that filled the house with a joyful sound. "I thought I was teaching her to be happy," she said to me, her voice a quiet whisper, "but I think she's teaching me." I saw then that her plan for revenge had completely changed, though she didn't have to say it out loud. Her revenge was no longer about hurting Mark. It was about creating a happiness so profound, so pure, that his petty victory would become meaningless. The final act of her plan was set for Christmas Eve, the night of her original despair. She told me she was taking Lily to a special place, a place that would either be the climax of her revenge or the final act of her own personal redemption. I wasn't sure which, but I knew I had to be there. I drove to her old house and parked across the street, a silent witness once again. I watched as her car pulled up, and she helped Lily out. The little girl, dressed in a new red dress, looked so happy, so full of life. Evelyn, a vision in a winter white coat, knelt down to talk to her. She handed her a small velvet box. I watched as Lily's eyes widened, a look of pure, childlike wonder on her face. Evelyn pointed toward the front door of her old house, a silent gesture that I knew was part of her plan. She was going to send Lily to the door, a living message to her father and his family. The thought of it filled me with a strange, dark dread. It was a cruel plan, a devastating revenge. And then I saw it. The little girl looked up at Evelyn and said something, a small, quiet sentence that made Evelyn's entire body go rigid. She took the box and put it in her own pocket. Her expression, once a mask of determined purpose, softened. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she hugged Lily tightly, a hug that seemed to convey 3 years of grief and loss in a profound, overwhelming love. I knew then that the plan had been aborted. Her revenge, her grand, devastating, calculated revenge, had been completely forgotten. The next day, Evelyn came to my door, her face still red from the cold, but her eyes bright with a new kind of light. She didn't have the usual cookies in her hands, but a small, carefully wrapped gift. It was a drawing. On it were 2 stick figures, a woman with long hair and a little girl with a cascade of blonde curls. The words, "My family," were written in a child's careful, wavering hand. She told me what had happened the night before. She had given Lily the box and told her to go to the door. But Lily had looked at her with a profound, unblinking honesty and said, "Mommy, I'm already home. I don't want to go anywhere else." The words had shattered Evelyn's carefully constructed plan. She had realized in that moment that she wasn't a villain. She wasn't a weapon. She was a mother. The revenge she had planned, the years of anger, of bitterness, all of it had been for nothing. It had all been erased by a little girl's simple, honest declaration of love. Evelyn, with a new purpose and a new family, threw herself into the adoption process with a fresh sense of urgency. The plan was no longer about revenge. It was about love. 6 months later, I was there in the courtroom, watching her and Lily, a little girl with a cascade of blonde curls and a newfound joyous spirit, stand before the judge. I saw Evelyn's old ex-husband and his new wife, their faces tight with a mix of anger and confusion. The judge, an older woman with a kind face, looked at Evelyn and told her that her dedication to this child was a testament to her character. And then, the little girl, Lily, spoke. She stood up and told the judge that Evelyn was the best mother she had ever had. And in that moment, the judge's decision was made. The gavel came down with a satisfying thud. The revenge, the plan, the anger, all of it was gone. All that was left was a new family. I think back to that day, to the woman I saw digging in the trash on a cold Christmas night. The truth that had left me stunned was not just about the child or her ex-husband's lies. It was about Evelyn herself. She had not come back to her old house to seek revenge. She had come back to find a new beginning. She had come back to find a child who was in need of a family, just as she was. And in saving that child, she had saved herself. That's the stunning truth that left me speechless that Christmas Eve. Sometimes the best revenge is not in destroying what once hurt you, but in building something so beautiful that it makes the pain of the past seem meaningless. Evelyn never went back to her old life. She never apologized. She never explained. She simply lived. And in doing so, she became the kind of mother her daughter always wanted, and the kind of person her ex-husband could never be. And that was the only revenge she ever needed. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel hit the block. The sharp final sound echoed in the stillness, and for a moment, it felt like the end of a long, torturous journey. Evelyn looked at Lily, tears streaming down her face, a mix of profound relief and overwhelming love. She knelt, wrapped her arms around the little girl, and whispered something in her ear. I didn't need to hear the words to understand. It was a promise, a vow to never let go. As they left the courtroom, I saw Evelyn's ex-husband and his new wife watching them. Mark's face was a study in shock and disbelief, a mask of entitlement finally cracking. He had never considered this outcome. He had always believed that Evelyn would fail, that she would prove his cruel accusations right. But in that moment, she was living proof of his ultimate defeat. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn and Lily settled into their new life. It was a life built on a foundation of love, not blood, and it was a revelation for Evelyn. She had been so consumed by grief and anger for so long that she had forgotten what true happiness felt like. She started to do simple things that had once seemed impossible. She would wake up early on a Saturday morning, not to review legal briefs, but to make pancakes for Lily. She would sit on the floor and help with her homework, patiently explaining complex math problems with a calmness she had never shown in a deposition. She would braid Lily's hair, her fingers clumsy at first, but with each passing day, becoming more confident, more gentle. She was learning to be a mother all over again, not a perfect, curated one, but a real one who made mistakes and learned from them. One night, as I walked my dog past their house, I saw Evelyn sitting on her front porch, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of steaming tea in her hands. I stopped for a moment, and she looked up and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. She invited me to sit with her, and we talked for hours. She told me about her past, about the woman she used to be, the ambitious, driven lawyer who had worked 80-hour weeks, who had missed school recitals and parent-teacher conferences. She had always believed that her success was what made her valuable, that her work was a testament to her worth. But in the end, it was that same ambition that had cost her everything. She confessed to me that she had been so lost in her own grief, so consumed by her desire for revenge, that she had almost missed the most important thing of all, the chance to heal. "I used to think that my life was over," she said, her voice soft and full of reflection. "I thought that the only way to get back what I had lost was to make them feel the same pain. I wanted to see him suffer. I wanted to see him understand what it felt like to have your child taken away." She paused, her eyes focused on a distant memory. But then I met Lily, and she taught me a lesson that no courtroom, no legal brief could ever teach me. She taught me that love isn't a transaction, it's a gift. Evelyn was not a woman who believed in fate, but she had come to believe in something else, a second chance. She had been given an opportunity to rewrite her story, not with bitterness and anger, but with love and compassion. She had found a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to live, and she had found it in the most unexpected of places, in a little girl who had been abandoned by her own father, a girl who had taught her what it truly meant to be a family. As the years passed, I watched Evelyn and Lily's family grow. They were a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. They didn't have a traditional family, but they had something far more valuable, a family built on choice, on commitment, and on unconditional love. And as I looked at them, I knew that Evelyn had not only won her battle, but she had won her life back. She had not needed to return to the place of her pain. She had found her own way, her own path to happiness, and that was a victory that no one could ever take away from her.